Single dad finds deaf boy being bullied in public park. He crouches down and signs to calm the child, but a billionaire woman saw the scene and did something that shocked everyone. Comment giving a score from 0 to 10 for my story. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The light afternoon rain transformed Central Park into a melancholic scene, where the noise of traffic blended with the echo of droplets hitting the pavement. The 30-year-old single dad hurried among the passers-by, his striking appearance drawing attention even when he tried to go unnoticed. His deep eyes carried the weight of a life that had taught him to fight for every achievement, every smile of his little girl, every day of dignity won through hard work. His steps slowed when a scene across the park magnetically captured his attention. A 4-year-old deaf boy, his angelic face marked by fear, was surrounded by a group of children who were pushing him with childish cruelty. The small aggressors laughed as they mimicked the boy's clumsy gestures, oblivious to the pain they caused. The adults around pretended not to see, immersed in their own daily worries, indifferent to the suffering unfolding before their eyes. The man's heart clenched with a familiar pain, buried memories resurfacing like violent waves. Without thinking twice, he crossed the park with determined strides, his imposing presence making the cruel children instinctively recoil. He knelt down to the frightened boy's level and began to make delicate signs with his hands, fluid movements that seemed to dance in the damp afternoon air. The silent words flowing from his fingers were filled with tenderness and understanding. The boy's face gradually lit up, his eyes moist with tears turning into windows of hope. It was rare to find someone who mastered that language with such naturalness, such genuine compassion emanating from every gesture. Across the park, a female figure watched the scene with growing intensity. The 30-year-old billionaire, possessing a beauty that drew attention wherever she went, felt something stirring deep within her. Her business empire had been built on calculated decisions and necessary coldness, but this display of humanity touched fibers of her soul that she thought she had lost long ago. She possessed a fortune accumulated through strategic investments and an estate that grew exponentially every quarter, but at that moment, watching the interaction between the unknown man and the vulnerable child, she felt surprisingly small in the face of such spontaneous generosity. Impulsively, the woman approached the small group that had formed around the scene. Her elegant presence contrasted with the simplicity of the man's clothes, but there was something in her eyes that spoke of a deeper connection to this moment of pure humanity. When he stood up, their eyes met for the first time. The electricity of the encounter was palpable, a tension that cut through the damp afternoon air like a sharp blade. She opened her mouth to speak, the words coming out with a determination that surprised even herself. She offered him a job at her foundation for special needs children, an opportunity that anyone in his financial situation would embrace without hesitation. But his reaction was completely opposite to what she expected. Male pride rose like an insurmountable barrier, his eyes hardening with a coldness that made her take a step back. He refused the offer with wounded dignity, claiming that he didn't need charity from rich women who played at doing good to ease their heavy consciences. The words came out harsher than he intended, but years of humiliation and prejudice had built defensive walls around his heart. The tension between them intensified when she insisted, explaining that her company developed assistive technologies and that he would be perfect to lead a revolutionary inclusive communication project. It wasn't charity, she argued with a passion that surprised him, but a genuine opportunity based on his evident talent. The discussion stretched for long minutes, their voices alternating between intense whispers and firmer statements. Passers-by began to notice the heated conversation, but both were too immersed in the conflict to care about the curious looks. The man felt a magnetic attraction to her strength and determination, even as he fought the impulse to trust her intentions. The woman, in turn, found herself fascinated by his unwavering integrity, a rare quality in her world of calculated interests and superficial relationships. When she finally managed to convince him to at least consider the proposal, handing him a card with her contact information, their fingers touched briefly. The contact lasted only seconds, but left invisible marks on both of them, a promise of emotional storms to come. He reluctantly put the card in his pocket, promising to think about the offer, but already knowing that his life had changed irrevocably at that moment. She watched him walk away with determined steps, carrying the boy he had comforted, and felt a strange emptiness settling in her chest. The rain had stopped, but the dark clouds on the horizon promised storms far more intense than any weather phenomenon. Fate had planted the seeds of a forbidden passion that would challenge everything both believed about love, social class, and the possibility of two opposite souls finding harmony in a world that insisted on separating them. 3 weeks had passed since the meeting in the park, and the single dad still carried the crumpled card in his shirt pocket, touching it occasionally, as if caressing a wound that wouldn't heal. Financial need knocked at his door with the cruel insistence of reality, but pride remained a wall he refused to tear down. His little daughter had developed a persistent cough that cheap medicines couldn't cure, and the medical bills piled up like an impossible mountain to climb. On a cold Monday morning, when dignity finally gave way to paternal despair, he dialed the number on the card with trembling fingers. Her voice on the other end of the line sounded professional, but there was a subtle warmth that made him question his own defenses. They arranged a meeting to discuss the details of the position, a lunch at a discreet restaurant that she had carefully chosen so as not to intimidate him with unnecessary ostentation. When he arrived at the location, he found her waiting at a secluded table, wearing simpler clothes than he had imagined, but which still carried the natural sophistication of someone born into privilege. She had traded high heels for flats, the expensive blazer for a discreet blouse, but nothing could disguise the aura of power that emanated naturally from her presence. The conversation started tense, punctuated by long, uncomfortable silences and glances that strayed when they met for too long. She explained that her company developed assistive technologies for people with hearing impairments, a growing market that demanded professionals with real experience, not just theoretical knowledge. He listened to her with growing skepticism, looking for the signs of condescension he knew so well between the lines of the conversation. The first spark of conflict arose when she casually mentioned that she had researched his professional background, discovering his interrupted training in special education and his informal work with deaf children in the suburbs. The feeling of invasion of privacy made him stiffen in his chair, his fists clenching involuntarily on the table. She realized the mistake immediately, trying to explain that it hadn't been morbid curiosity, but professional need to know the qualifications of a possible employee. The words came out tumbling, revealing a vulnerability she rarely showed, a genuine anxiety of having offended someone whose opinions mattered more than they should. The lunch stretched for 2 hours, gradually transforming from a professional meeting into something more intimate and complex. They discovered unexpected points of connection, shared experiences despite their opposite backgrounds. She revealed that she had partially lost her hearing during childhood due to a poorly treated infection, a secret that the family had hidden out of social shame, forcing her to wear discreet hearing aids until adolescence. The revelation completely changed the dynamic between them. His skepticism turned into understanding, while she felt exposed in a way she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, he saw her not as a rich woman playing at philanthropy, but as someone who genuinely understood the struggles he faced. When he accepted the job, it was with the express condition that he would be treated like any other employee, without privileges or condescension. She agreed readily, but both knew that there was an electric current running between them that would make it impossible to maintain a purely professional relationship. The first days at the company were an emotional roller coaster. The corporate environment was initially intimidating, but he discovered that he possessed a natural intuition for developing practical solutions that the engineers couldn't visualize. His human approach perfectly complemented the team's technical knowledge, creating a synergism that impressed even the most skeptical executives. The sexual tension between them grew with each casual encounter in the hallways, each meeting where their opinions clashed and then converged on brilliant solutions. She began to look for excuses to visit him in the lab, while he invented unnecessary reports to have reasons to go to her office. During a particularly intense afternoon of joint work, when they were testing a new sign language translation device, their bodies came dangerously close. She was helping to adjust the equipment on his wrists when the electricity of the touch became unbearable. For an infinite moment they looked at each other with an intensity that made the air around them vibrate with contained tension. He abruptly pulled away, claiming that he needed to pick up his daughter from school, leaving her alone in the lab with her heart racing and her hands trembling. She remained motionless for long minutes, trying to process the intensity of what she had felt. The way her body had reacted to his touch in a way she hadn't experienced in years. The most disturbing discovery came when she brought her own daughter to see the new project. The 4-year-old girl, small and fragile like a frightened bird, had developed communication problems after a trauma that no one could fully explain. Specialist doctors had suggested expensive therapies and experimental treatments, but nothing seemed to work effectively. When the child saw the man for the first time, something magical happened. She approached him without fear, gently touching his arms as he crouched down to her level. The signs he made were different from those the therapists used, more fluid and natural, filled with an infinite patience that she recognized instinctively. The mother watched the interaction with tears in her eyes, seeing her daughter respond in a way that hadn't happened for months. It was as if he possessed a special key that opened emotional doors that all the expensive experts couldn't even find. When he spontaneously offered to work with the girl during his lunch breaks without asking anything in return, she felt something breaking inside her chest. His genuine generosity contrasted brutally with the world of calculated interests in which she lived, where every gesture of kindness had a hidden price. The private sessions became the highlight of both their days. He would arrive at her office at lunchtime, carrying illustrated books and adapted games, transforming the corporate room into a playful universe where communication flowed naturally. She spent time watching them through the glass door, hypnotized by his infinite patience and the way her daughter flourished under his dedicated attention. During these silent observations, she began to notice details about him that intrigued her deeply. The way his muscles tensed when he concentrated, the small wrinkles around his eyes when he smiled genuinely at the child, the way his large, calloused hands could be so delicate when teaching new signs. The attraction she felt for him intensified dangerously, mixing with a genuine admiration for his dedication and integrity. She began to question everything about her own life, comparing his authenticity with the superficiality of the relationships she had built over the years among people of her social class. The breaking point came during a rainy Friday, when he arrived visibly shaken for the session with her daughter. The little girl had spent the night in the hospital due to her persistent cough, and the tests had revealed pneumonia that required intensive and expensive treatment. The despair in his eyes was palpable, the feeling of paternal inadequacy eroding his already fragile self-esteem. Without thinking about the consequences, she immediately offered to pay all the medical expenses, making available the best specialists in the metropolis. His reaction was explosive and devastating. Hurt pride turned into anger, painful accusations that she saw him as a personal charity project, an object of pity that fueled her need to feel superior. The discussion stretched for the rest of the afternoon, their voices echoing through the almost empty building. Words were said that could not be taken back, wounds opened that would bleed for a long time. He accused her of playing with his dignity, while she shouted that she was just trying to help someone she truly cared about. When he finally slammed the door, leaving her alone in the office with a broken heart, both knew that something precious had been irreparably damaged between them. For 2 weeks after the devastating argument, the silence between them became a tangible presence in the company hallways. He arrived punctually every morning, immersed himself in work with almost obsessive dedication, and avoided eye contact when she passed by the lab. She, in turn, cancelled all unnecessary meetings and began working late, using exhaustion as anesthesia for the pain that throbbed constantly in her chest. His daughter had recovered from pneumonia, but the financial burden of treatment had forced him to take extra jobs on weekends, teaching sign language at a distant community center. The deep circles around his eyes told the story of sleepless nights and constant worries, but pride remained an armor he refused to remove. On a grey Tuesday, when the tension in the office had become almost unbearable, her daughter appeared unexpectedly at the company. The girl had convinced the nanny to bring her, claiming she needed to see the man who had become her special teacher. When she found him in the lab, her small eyes filled with tears as she realized he seemed different, more distant and sad. The scene that unfolded was deeply touching. The child approached him with the innocent determination that only the very young possess, touching his face with her delicate little hands while signing, asking why he was sad. The emotion that overwhelmed him was devastating, making him kneel down and hug the girl with a tenderness that made all the employees present stop to watch. The mother arrived running, alerted by the nanny about her daughter's whereabouts, and found the scene that broke her heart in two. Seeing him interact with her girl, despite all the hurt between them, revealed a truth she could no longer deny. What she felt for him had transcended any physical attraction or professional admiration, transforming into something much deeper and scarier. That night she made a decision that would change the course of their lives forever. She found out where he lived through the HR files and decided to visit him, bringing with her a revelation she had kept for years as a poisoned secret. The rain that fell heavily when she knocked on the door of his simple house seemed to foreshadow the emotional storm that was to come. When he opened the door and saw her soaked on the doorstep, wearing casual clothes and with her hair disheveled by the rain, the mask of indifference he had built in recent weeks crumbled instantly. She asked to come in, not as his boss, but as a woman who desperately needed to be heard. His house was small and modest, but impeccably organized and full of children's drawings taped to the walls. The contrast with her empty, cold mansion was stark, making her realize how much she had isolated herself in an ivory tower built with money and loneliness. He served tea in mismatched mugs, the silence between them loaded with a tension that made the air vibrate. The confession she made that night revealed layers of guilt and remorse she had carried for years. Her company, she discovered through a recent audit, had inadvertently caused the closure of a community clinic years ago, where he had temporarily lost his hearing due to an accident during a poorly done renovation. The connection of fate was cruel and ironic, an invisible thread that linked them long before they met. The tears that rolled down her face were genuine, filled with a pain she didn't know how to express. She revealed that she had spent the last few years trying to repair the damage caused by her early business decisions, when blind ambition had overshadowed any human consideration. The money she accumulated through investments in stocks and cryptocurrency was stained by the moral blood of families like his. His reaction was deafening silence. For long minutes he just stared at her, processing the magnitude of the revelation. The anger he expected didn't come immediately, replaced by a painful understanding of how fate had orchestrated their meeting through so much past suffering. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse with contained emotion. He confessed that he had discovered the connection weeks ago through old documents he found among his late wife's belongings. The closed clinic had been the place where she worked as a nurse, where they met, where they built their dreams before everything fell apart. The second revelation was even more devastating. He learned that his wife had died not only from childbirth complications, but also due to a lack of adequate medical resources after the clinic closed. The guilt he carried for not having been able to save her was now mixed with the discovery that the woman he was falling in love with had an indirect responsibility in that tragedy. The emotional weight of the truth was overwhelming for both. She begged for forgiveness with a vulnerability she had never shown anyone, offering to give everything she possessed to repair the irreparable. He, in turn, struggled against contradictory feelings of betrayal, understanding, and an attraction that refused to die despite all the revealed pain. The sexual tension that had been repressed for weeks exploded in that moment of extreme vulnerability. When she got up to leave, believing she had lost any chance of redemption, he grabbed her wrist with a force that surprised them both. The electric touch that had always existed between them intensified, now charged with an emotional complexity that made every second of contact almost unbearable. They kissed with the despair of someone who knows they are doing something forbidden, but cannot resist the magnetic force that attracts them. The kiss was filled with tears, guilt, passion, and a desperate need for human connection amid so much suffering. When they separated, both knew they had crossed a line that would make it impossible to go back. She spent the night in his house, not in his bed, but on the small living room sofa, where they talked until dawn about pain, forgiveness, and the possibility of building something beautiful on the rubble of so much suffering. He spoke about his wife with a tenderness that made her heart clench, while she confessed that she had never truly loved until she met him. When the sun rose, illuminating the simple house with a golden and hopeful light, they had made a decision that would change their lives forever. She would give up her company, selling everything and distributing the assets among the families harmed by her past decisions. They would start from scratch, together, building something based on redemption and true love. But fate still held cruel surprises for them. When she arrived at the office that morning to begin the process of dissolving the company, she found her personal assistant with a grave expression. A group of investors had discovered her relationship with an employee of humble origin and was threatening to withdraw all capital if she did not end the relationship immediately. The discovery that they had been spied on and that her private life was being used as blackmail was the final blow that broke the last barriers between them. But it also revealed how far the powerful were willing to go to maintain the status quo, transforming their love into a much larger battle against a system that refused to accept that the heart does not recognize differences in social class. The war had only just begun, and both knew that the price of victory would be much higher than they imagined. The investors' blackmail triggered a series of events that tested the limits of both's emotional endurance. During 3 months of legal battle and constant psychological pressure, she refused to give in to threats, even when the value of her stock plummeted and her reputation in the business world was systematically destroyed by the specialized press. He, in turn, faced a subtle campaign of intimidation at work, where colleagues began to treat him coldly and his ideas began to be questioned constantly. The silent war that was unfolding behind the scenes of the corporate world was cruel and calculated. Important contracts were mysteriously cancelled, suppliers began demanding advance payments, and key employees received irresistible offers from competing companies. The empire she had built with so much effort slowly crumbled, but her determination to protect the love she had found remained unwavering. During a particularly difficult night, when the last investors withdrew their capital, leaving the company on the verge of bankruptcy, she made the most radical decision of her life. She sold her personal assets, liquidated her investments in funds, and used even her gold reserves to pay compensation to the families harmed by the closure of the clinic years ago. The financial sacrifice was devastating, but the feeling of moral liberation was indescribable. He watched her transformation with a mixture of admiration and growing concern. The powerful woman he had met was being systematically destroyed because of her feelings, and the guilt he felt was almost unbearable. During sleepless nights, he seriously considered ending the relationship to spare her from more suffering, but every time he saw her fighting with such determination, his admiration for her deepened. The most shocking discovery came through documents she found in the company's old files. The accident that had caused his temporary hearing loss was not just constructive negligence, but the result of deliberate sabotage orchestrated by a competitor who wanted to force the closure of the clinic to build a commercial complex on the site. Her company had only been a piece in a much larger game of corruption and greed. The revelation completely changed both's perspective on guilt and responsibility. She was not the villain of his story, but another victim of a corrupt system that sacrificed human lives in the name of profit. The discovery brought a sense of relief mixed with outrage, further strengthening the connection between them through mutual understanding of the unjust suffering they had faced. When the last financial resources ran out and the company finally closed its doors, she found herself in a completely new situation. For the first time in her adult life, she needed to look for a job like any ordinary person, face humiliating interviews where her tarnished reputation weighed against her, discover the real value of her skills stripped of the power that money provided. He accompanied her on this journey of rediscovery with infinite patience, teaching her to value simple things she had never appreciated. Home-cooked dinners prepared with cheap ingredients became more special than the expensive restaurants she used to frequent. Walks in the park where they met replaced international business trips, offering a genuine intimacy she had never experienced. Her daughter adapted surprisingly well to the changes, flourishing under the constant attention of the mother who now had time to devote herself completely to motherhood. The therapy sessions with him turned into spontaneous playtime in the park, where the girl learned sign language through games invented on the spot, surrounded by the love of two adults who had found purpose in simplicity. During an autumn afternoon, while watching the children play in the same park where it all began, she made a confession that revealed the depth of her transformation. She said that she had never been truly happy when she possessed all that wealth, living in a golden prison of social obligations and superficial relationships. The dignified poverty she experienced alongside him was liberating in a way she had never imagined possible. The marriage proposal happened completely unexpectedly during a storm that forced them to take shelter under the awning of a closed store. He didn't have money for an expensive ring, but he offered a simple band made with a silver thread he found at home, molded with his own hands during a sleepless night. The simplicity of the gesture contrasted brutally with the expensive gifts she used to receive, but the sentimental value was immeasurable. She accepted with tears in her eyes, not for the makeshift ring, but for the certainty that she had found someone willing to face any storm by her side. The wedding would be simple, celebrated at City Hall with only the two children as witnesses, but the love that would seal it would be more solid than any sumptuous ceremony of her past life. The life they built together in the following months was modest but full of genuine joys. He got a better job at a specialized public school, where his talent for working with special needs children was valued and respected. She found work as a social worker, using her business experience to improve the bureaucratic processes that hindered needy families. The two children became sisters at heart, communicating through a mixture of sign language and their own inventions that only they fully understood. The small house they rented in a simple neighborhood teemed with children's laughter and family projects, creating precious memories that no fortune could buy. The final twist came completely unexpectedly, 2 years after they had rebuilt their lives on foundations of genuine love. A private investigator, hired by one of the families, benefited by the compensation she had paid, discovered irrefutable evidence of the sabotage that had caused the clinic to close. The real culprits were exposed, and a massive lawsuit resulted in millions of dollars in compensation for all the victims. When the lawyer appeared at their door with a check that would completely restore their financial situation, both looked at each other with a complicity that needed no words. The money they received was not used to resume their previous lifestyle, but to create a genuine foundation to support families with special needs, children, offering not only financial resources, but the human support that really made a difference. The school they founded together became a national model for inclusion, where deaf and hearing children learned side by side, breaking down barriers that society insisted on maintaining. He became the principal, while she managed the administrative aspects, creating a professional partnership that perfectly mirrored the harmony of their marriage. During an awards ceremony where the school was recognized for its excellence, they met again in the same park where it all began. The two daughters, now grown and fluent in multiple forms of communication, were playing in the same spot where a frightened boy had received help from a kind stranger years ago. Watching the children repeat the cycle of solidarity that had changed their lives, they understood that true love was not just about finding the right person, but about becoming the right people for each other. The social differences that once seemed insurmountable had transformed into complementarity, creating a family that transcended any traditional definition of class or status. As the sun set on that golden afternoon, painting the sky with colors that resembled their individual journeys of pain and redemption, they walked hand in hand towards the future they had built together. Love had overcome not only external obstacles, but had profoundly transformed who they were, proving that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what really matters in life.